might just like jump right into it.
Yeah, let's just jump right in.
Okay, let me get it.
Okay.
Tune into a cleaner future with Pollution Evolution.
We are your hosts, Kimberly Sauceda-Neupane and
Faith Harrison.
On this podcast, we will be discussing pollutants of concern in your daily environment, including your indoor environment and your outdoor environment. We also want to discuss some of the health impacts that these pollutants have on you and some of the economic factors to consider whenever you're thinking of pollution. On top of all of that, we are going to be bringing on subject matter experts to discuss some of these topics with us and give a better understanding to all of our viewers and listeners as to what exactly pollution is, why is it important, and why are we talking about this in the first place.
If you're interested in catching us weekly, you can join us every Saturday at 4 p.m. here on YouTube at Pollution Evolution. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts and anywhere else you get your podcasts. If you're interested in following us outside of the podcast, we also have an Instagram at Pollution Evolution Podcast. You can find memes there and fun little snippets. It's a good time over there. We're so excited to have you here for our first episode today, and we're excited to dive in on these topics that are so near and dear to me and Kimberly, and we look forward to sharing a little bit about us and who we are.
So let's go ahead and dive right in. We wanted to start by first introducing ourselves. Faith, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Faith, as we've kind of stated. I'm from El Paso, Texas. I'm 25 years old, and I currently work as a hydrologist. For those of you who do not know, I basically help manage all of our surface water, so lakes, rivers, streams, bays, canyons, ravines, water. I help manage all of that for our state and to ensure that we will have enough water to last us for generations. But my background's actually in environmental engineering with a focus on watershed and environmental modeling. I then use these models to determine the way that nutrients cycle throughout the surface and subsurface, and also to determine how the water is moving and how much water is going to be available at any given point in any given reservoir. And when I say reservoir, think of lakes or streams or anything that's holding water, even if you can't see it. So now, Kimberly, would you like to give us a little bit of background on yourself and introduce yourself and where you're from?
Yeah, so I am 25 years old. I was born and raised in the Texas Panhandle, and I was actually raised in this small town called Borger, Texas. It was my experiences growing up in this town that actually showed me that pollution existed, and it piqued my interest actually and made me want to go into environmental engineering and science as a pursuit for my career. I presently work as an engineering specialist specializing in air quality regulations. So my background aside from that is I actually did some ice nucleation research, and whenever I talk about ice nucleation, it relates to clouds and how clouds are formed, specifically snow clouds and hail clouds. So I wanted to touch on how we met. That's an important part as to how we ended up here actually. So Faith and I met during our studies at West Texas A&M University.
We met in our mentor group. We were actually a part of the scholarship group for minorities. And since we were women in STEM and women of color in STEM, we met in there. And me and Kimberly wound up becoming our club president and vice president kind of randomly. It was just kind of foisted upon us.
It was.
And then we started spending more and more time together. And then an event happened and just brought us super close. And then ever since then, we kind of realized that through our studies and through the experiences that we had growing up, we both share a really deep need and want to change the planet and to make it cleaner and to give future generations opportunities that me and Kimberly didn't have growing up.
Yeah, exactly. And so that leads us into our next topic, which is how has pollution impacted our lives? Do you mind if I go ahead and start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for me, pollution has always been an interesting subject. I, growing up, obviously did not know what pollution was to the extent that I do now, but I did see it on a daily basis. So for those of you who don't know, you probably have never heard of this town, actually. It's in the Texas Panhandle. It's named Borger, Texas. It's a burger, but with an O instead of a U. If you look it up via satellite, I highly recommend that you do. You will see that there is a black spot on the town. And this black spot surrounds 2 of the 7 industrial facilities. Yes, you heard that right. That is 7 industrial facilities. And this little town is 12,000 people. Some people will look at that and say, oh, well, that's quite a few people. That's an equivalent amount of industries. But in my view, that's a lot of industries per person.
But to just give kind of scale of that, if you are in like the Dallas Fort Worth area that has millions of people, there's never going to be that many industrial facilities that closely concentrated to that many populations with 1 million people. So imagine that many with only 12,000.
Yeah, exactly. And so I grew up seeing pollution whenever we would play outside. You know, I didn't ever really think of it, but your hands would get dirtier whenever you would play outside, and you would come in and my mom would be like, you need to wash your hands. You can't be walking around like that. And so I would see these things, and I distinctly remember the story that always gets me, and whenever I tell this to people, they don't ever believe me, is going to Amarillo, which is not far away from Borger, and as you're driving out of town, you see the snow that's piled on the road after a snowstorm, and the snow has actually turned black. So I don't know if they use dirt, what they're using to clean up this road, but the snow is not black all around town. It is only whenever they pile it on the sides of the road. And so I saw this growing up, and I thought this was normal. I mean, I looked at it as black snow, and I was like, oh, it's just the black snow that falls in our town. And I remember looking out as we were driving one day and seeing that the snow started to get whiter as we left my hometown. And that really sparked my interest in the environment. And that led me into environmental engineering and environmental science studies. And then during my studies, I actually took an air pollution class. And in this class, I remember sitting next to Faith and watching a video about the London smog and seeing how bad the pollution was and thinking, I've seen that before. Like, why does that look familiar? And in reality, it was because I had experienced something like the London smog growing up. There is presently a non-attainment issuance for my hometown for sulfur dioxide, and this pollutant alone can cause acid rain, which is very detrimental to the environment and to people's health over time. And on top of that, they have a lot of other pollution concerns. And you know, all of this to say that it's led us to this point of having these conversations amongst ourselves. And whenever you have these conversations so often, I don't know about you, but for me, I've noticed, you know, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, hey, like, I feel like everybody needs to know this. Because some of these things you find out and you're like, that cannot be true. Mm-hmm. But whenever you find out it actually is true, it's jarring. Mm-hmm. So what about you, Faith? Like, how has pollution impacted your life?
Thank you for sharing, Kimberly. I think that your story is really important. I'm glad that we get to finally give it the platform it deserves. For me, pollution has impacted me my whole life. I grew up on a military base in El Paso, Texas called Fort Bliss. And I don't know if our viewers know, but the Department of Defense and the EPA have done studies around multiple military bases on the U.S. and they found at least 60 different contaminants in the groundwater and the soil. And that's the soil that our food grows in. That's the groundwater that we're drinking and bathing in, specifically because I lived in the desert. We had a river there, but a lot of our drinking water comes from groundwater resources. And so along with that, I was exposed to multiple contaminants before I could even say my first word. And a lot of people who live near on these military bases are also being exposed to these things. And this isn't to like bash the military, but it's the reality of what's actually happening. And if you live in those areas, the potential for being exposed. And I also dealt with a lot of drought issues. Again, living in the Southwest in an arid region, there was a lot of water restrictions, a lot of summers where I remember like we had to be very conservative with the amount of waters we're using, or seeing the river getting lower and lower each year and praying for rain, or sometimes going months without a drop of water, and not just being normal, and realizing that like water wasn't a full human right. It wasn't something that was just readily afforded like you're taught in school. Like, I was the living example of that. Like, it wasn't readily afforded to us. There was restrictions, and when we got water, it wasn't even clean. Mm-hmm. And even before I was born, my mom actually was exposed to environmental air pollutants. She lived in an urban area in New York City, in Queens, and there was a lot of industries there, and because of the air pollutants, particularly the particulate she was breathing in, me, my brother, my sister all got asthma, and we were born with it because of air pollutant exposure. And so pollution, like, essentially has shaped my entire life in a way, and like has shaped my health and decisions that I make for the future, because I now know that the things that you can potentially be exposed to in the womb can impact you forever. And like, even to this day at 25, I still have a lot of health related issues, and in the future I have no idea the extent of what those pollutants have actually done to me, because I am still young. Mm-hmm. And it's very scary to kind of have like a ticking time bomb in your body.
Yeah, and I get that too. I think that's what motivated both of us is you know, you realize you've been exposed to these things, and you realize like, hey, I was in a community of thousands, tens of thousands of people, if not more, and you know, if I was exposed, they were exposed too. Mm-hmm. and seeing or hearing about incidences of like somebody that we love or we know of that got sick mm-hmm. with something that we know is related to this pollution, it makes it hard to swallow like the idea like, hey, like this is happening and mm-hmm. we haven't done anything.
Yeah, we should stay silent.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of programming, and this is from our own personal experiences in the environmental field, we've heard a lot of people just dismissing these claims openly. It's like an open secret that these things are happening, but they're not doing anything about it. And we took an oath when we chose to go down the path of engineering to protect the public and the public's health and the environment. And we feel that by doing this podcast and sharing this knowledge and information with the masses, we're upholding that oath and protecting you along with the work that we're doing as well.
Yes, exactly. So along this journey, we hope that you can teach us some things and we can also teach you. So one of the things that we wanted to focus on or to touch on is what exactly is it that we want you guys to know out of all of this? You know, we're going to be rambling a lot. Sometimes we won't make much sense. But whenever you listen to us, we obviously have a purpose for this coming out. And Faith, what would you say is the biggest thing that you want the world to know, like, regarding this?
Regarding specifically, like, pollution-related issues, I want the world to know that there's still hope. That, like, people like me and you and our colleagues are out there actively fighting against pollution and changing climate and these large natural disasters. And we're not giving up hope even in the face of insurmountable like discourse and like confusion and like misinformation, and like that we are out here genuinely trying to educate people and like share a message of hope instead of like gloom, doom, and sadness, because I think it's so easy to like fall into that pattern of everything is terrible, the world is burning, half of the world's on ice, half the world's on fire, what the hell do we do? But it's just like, you know, we educate ourselves, we arm ourselves with tools, we imagine a new future with like new technologies that will protect us, that will bring us forward into like the next iteration of humanity, where we're not relying on those things that are causing pollution to the world.
Yeah, and I think to add to that is I want the world to know, you know, everything that we say is going to sound kind of woo-woo a little bit sometimes, but we will be backing everything with information, with citations and resources, and alongside this, all of the information we're putting out there is because we are concerned for the public. We don't have anything to gain from this. And to be honest with you, we wholeheartedly care very deeply about the public. And we feel like this is a great platform and avenue for us to be able to discuss with everybody and just open up the door for us to have conversations with anybody who's willing to have them with us.
That's a great point, Kim. And like on that topic, I wanted to touch on like what we can do as a whole to prioritize community care in the face of all of this pollution and like in the face of all of this craziness. Like, what do you think we can do to kind of like protect ourselves and all of those around us?
So I think the biggest thing is what we're doing right here, right now, is having a conversation. It's having conversations with everybody that you know, going on your morning routine, whenever you're going to get your coffee, saying hi to the person that makes your coffee, or being kind to the person that's trying to get over in the lane in front of you. You know, you never know what somebody's day is like, and opening the door to have a conversation or to be kind to somebody just gives you an opportunity to say, you know, like, hey, I care about you. We may not know each other. I care about you because we're human.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to consider at the end of the day, is that we're all human. And if it's happening to us, you know, it's more than likely not an isolated incident. If it's happening to you, there could be hundreds, if not thousands or millions of other people going through the same thing as you. And with pollution, the biggest thing is talking to one another, being there for one another, because not all the time is there going to be legal regulations or people to fall back on to help make sure that these areas are safe.
Yeah.
And that's the sad reality, is kind of also why we're doing this, is because there are chemicals out there that they have movies made about them, and they have settlements that were hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're still not regulated. They're still out there. I mean, there's forever chemicals in almost everything. Like every human on the planet, every living being on the planet has PFAS in them.
Yeah.
And that's insane.
It's insane. And it should make us angry that like we had that choice taken away from us. And like piggybacking off of what Kimberly said, you're completely right. I don't think that it's going to be particularly like governmental action that brings awareness and saves us. It's going to be us coming together as like a community and as a people and just saying like, we don't want to be poisoned anymore. Because like ultimately when you are exposed to these chemicals, like in me and Kim's case, we've both been exposed to things we're not even sure the total amount of contaminants that we've been exposed to. We only know a few of them. And so those things happened before we were adults, before we were born in some cases, and we just don't want another generation to have like those things afflicting them. And like coming together as a community and taking care of each other is like the first step in kind of stopping that. And like stopping that cycle is like just caring about each other, because that's how we fight pollution. Because I feel like a lot of the mass polluters that exist out there are disregarding that one facet of care for everybody, and to knowingly be dumping like hexavalent chromium or like PFAS or
any of these can
NOx or SOx or sulfur dioxide, just a whole list of things, and like knowing what they do to people and like dumping it in those communities, like that's not prioritizing community care. That's not the message that like we should go forward and continue to allow to happen.
Yeah, and I think that also touches on something that I should bring up, is also whenever you see something going wrong in your community, bring it up to your local officials. You know, they typically have town hall meetings. Sometimes they even have them with the local industries in your areas. And you can meet with them and you can have a face-to-face conversation and be like, and just tell them like, you know, this is the problem that I am facing, and this is the problem the community is facing, and like what can you do to help us out? Because asking them for help or asking for your city officials to recognize that there is an issue is the first step.
Yeah, and it's also their job. Like, we often forget that they're civil servants. Like, we elected and hired them. So if you do have a concern, like, it is their job and duty to address that, and you shouldn't feel fear to go to them. Because I'm sure if they didn't know and had no idea this was happening and you bring it to their attention, it could like escalate it more and like get more eyes on it and continue to push it forward and hopefully come to a resolution. But in most cases,
it takes a while to get there.
Yeah.
And that's something that we also want everybody to know is with environmental issues, you know, it takes a long time because you have to get legislation passed. You have to have proof that it's happening in the first place. You have to have all of these health reports and statistical analyses, and it's not easy to put all of that together, and it doesn't take, you know, it's not going to take a couple of weeks. It's going to take years.
Decades sometimes, because there's some like litigation that is going from like the 80s and 90s that's still ongoing to today.
Yeah. And so, like, that's something that we, like, everybody needs to consider as well is, you know, as much as we want change doesn't happen overnight. Change happens by us building community, us understanding more what is going on in the first place, and having a voice and being able to have a platform for that voice where you can say, you know, I have personally seen this going on in my community and I don't know what to do about it. If somebody were to come forward and tell us, you know, this is going on in our community, what do I do? You know, we can help provide some kind of resources, some kind of support. We want everybody to know that regardless of where you stand on environmental pollution or what your case is, we are here to listen. And we are also here to provide a space without judgment and to give resources for everybody, even those who can't afford to have the nicest of things, because personally, financially, that's all we'll say on that.
And kind of leading with all of this, now that we're kind of on this point, me and Kim wanted to just offer some ways that you can actually start to fight pollution in your local communities and offer some solutions to some of the problems that we highlighted in this episode and that we're going to touch in on our further episodes on our different pollutants. And the first thing that we recommend is getting a water filter and an air filter, because that will take care of your water quality, your drinking water quality, and your indoor air pollution risk and like exposure. And you can get as expensive as a reverse osmosis filter, which I recommend because of its capabilities to take out certain contaminants that maybe like a Brita filter or pure wouldn't. But I also know that they are pricey and expensive, and if that is out of the budget, then just like a standard water filter, it will not remove as many contaminants and as difficult ones such as like PFAS and like fluoride and things of that nature, but it will take care of a lot of different contaminants. And same with an indoor air filter, like a HEPA filter is probably one of the better ones that you can get, but there's also cheaper ones to be purchased, and you can also make your own or buy plants or even forage plants. Like I love to go out in nature and just take cuttings and start a new plant, and you can find a lot of local like plants that are really good at filtering your air by doing that as well.
Another thing that we already touched on this a little bit was just to make sure that if you see something, say something. You know, it's like when we were kids. You know, we're bringing back the saying, see something, say something. Pollution is not the solution to your problems. So if you see something, please contact somebody, your local government, your local officials. They say that it's out of their control. Try to go further up. Just try to get somebody to listen to you, because it's important that our voices are heard. And it's also important that, you know, we're not being exposed to pollution at exorbitant levels. Another
thing you can do is just get educated on the different types of pollution, of water pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, and etc. There's a lot of free resources through the Environmental Protection Agency or the EPA or whatever local environmental agency you have in your state or country. And you can also go to your libraries. They are great resources to do any sort of research, and your librarians would love to help you on this journey. They're also another great way to center your community is by using free resources resources that are allocated to help you. And we believe that on your journey, like those are just like a few things that can really help you get started on it. You don't even have to be as extreme as us and like go get whole degrees and everything. Like these are just small practical steps that you can take. And like as we go through this podcast, we'll be doing that each week, just giving you small, practical, actionable steps you can take each day to help make a cleaner future. And hence why we say tune in for a cleaner future.
Yeah, and something that you can do for homework, or if you have kids or something and you want to check your water quality, or you want to see what the water quality is around town. Maybe this is a freebie science project for somebody out there. But you can get water testing kits on Amazon. They're really cheap. I think $20 or so for, you can get like 100 test strips with like 12 contaminants on them. And
different cations and anions as well.
Yeah, so they have that covers various different contaminants, various different things that you want to know about your water. So you can get one of those test kits. They're super simple. You can just do your own test at home and see what you find out. If you see something, like I said, say something, contact your local officials to see if they'll come test your water for you if you want to do that instead. That is always free, and I definitely recommend taking up that offer with your local community. All right, well, I think that's everything for today. So thank you everybody for joining us on our first episode.
Yes, thank you so much. And you can join us next week where we cover our first environmental pollutant, chromium hexavalent.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, chromium hexavalent is also known as the Aaron Brockovich chemical. I recommend that you watch the Aaron Brockovich movie if you haven't seen it, as a little foreshadowing for next week's podcast. And it's going to talk about the contaminant in a specific area and the settlement that actually happened. It's really chilling to watch, so be prepared. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. We'll see you next week. Okay, so,
before we can continue, let's discuss...
Let's just run that part back. This is so